Welcome everyone as we close week 4 of the MCIC series. As a reminder, this is a virtual conference series hosted by the Department of Campus Climate. This virtual conference series is running through the entire month of March, and you are able to register up until the last day of March. I want to thank everyone who is here and engaging today, and also those who have engaged with us in the past, who maybe watch recordings, or simply just support us in this endeavor. Soon, Kaden will be sharing our community standards in the Zoom chat. We do expect folks to read and abide by these standards today and throughout all of the sessions during the MCIC series. I will ask right now to please mute your microphone when you aren't speaking. This helps reduce background noise and is respectful for our presenter today. Closed captioning is available for all sessions during the MCIC series. You should be seeing closed captioning in a dark gray box at the bottom of your screen at this time. If you do not, this option may be under the CC button or perhaps under the More button in your Zoom control panel, and you're looking for an option that says View Live Transcript. Please message us in the Zoom chat if you're having any difficulties throughout this session. Another reminder that this session is being recorded, and most of the sessions during the MCIC series are recorded as well. This is being done to make the sessions as accessible as possible for those who cannot attend live, and also for those outside the UW-Platteville institution. This recording will be available up to 3 business days after the live session occurs, and you can find this recording in all our Campus Climate YouTube channel and on the Campus Climate SharePoint site. If you have questions, comments, or concerns today or at any time throughout the MCIC series, please message us utilizing the Zoom chat either publicly or privately, or email us at campusclimate@uwplatt.edu. We do monitor this email during our sessions as well. And now I would like to introduce our presenter for today, Natasha Geyer. Her presentation today is entitled Disability Dialogues, Disability Rights, and Advocacy. Disability Dialogues is a 4-part series that focuses on examining perceptions around disability and disability identity. This series will involve discussions centered around issues faced by the disability community. And as I said, today is the last session, and the topic is disability rights and advocacy. This series is led by Natasha Geyer, who is a disability specialist for services for students with disability at the University of Wisconsin-Platteville. I will now hand things over to Natasha.
Thank you, Emily. I appreciate all of you attending, and especially if you were able to attend all 4 sessions. I feel like I should have gotten a punch card and you all got a free cookie or something. But I really appreciate you all being here. Today, we are going to take a look at disability throughout history. So first we'll look at how far we've come and where we still need to go. And then we'll talk about how we can be advocates, activists, and allies. I do want to note that the disability community is very diverse, and I do not by any means represent or speak for the entire disability community. The information I present today was gathered through research, interactions with the disability community, and my experiences working with disabled folks. I also want to point out that we are going to talk about some potentially sensitive topics, and we may not be all in the same place or have the same experiences or use the same terms related to disability, and that's okay. This is a safe place, and it's okay to feel uncomfortable or to make a mistake, but please feel free to participate. You can participate participate in today's discussion by raising your hand. The raise hand feature is found under the reactions. You can also use the microphone button to unmute yourself and speak. You can use the chat to ask questions or respond to prompts, either publicly or privately. We will be doing a whiteboard and you can record your answers on there. And then you can also use the little Zoom reactions. So I'm going to start first of all by launching a poll. And my poll question today is, do disabled people have equal rights today? So I will give you a moment to answer that question.
I don't know why, but my poll went away right away.
Yep, can't see the poll.
Let me relaunch it. How about now? Awesome. Thank you for letting me know that, Aaron.
That was my bad, Natasha. I think we hit the launch button at the same time. Just cancel each other out.
Give you about 20 more seconds to answer that. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end that. And I'll share the results with you. So it looks like about 81% of you said no, they do not, and about 19% said yes. So we are going to dive into that, and we will check in back a little bit later and see how we feel at that point in time. So the first thing I want to look at is just some historical perceptions of disability throughout time. I just noticed a chat. No, Jason, you got to pay for those Girl Scout cookies. We got goals to meet. So some of the beliefs over time related to disability are that people with disabilities were defective or possessed, they were immoral or sinners, they were a danger to themselves and others, they were contagious, or they were incapable of independence. And some of the treatment that resulted from those perceptions was that they were discarded, they were subject to exploitation, experimentation, sterilization, and institutionalization. So taking a little bit closer look at how folks with disabilities experience life throughout history. First, in prehistory, in hunter-gatherer societies, there is some evidence that disabled people were cared for. So they could see examples of limbs that had been broken and set in some skeletons. But in most cases, if they were unable to help the tribe in some way, they would be left behind. And so I know in the last session, we talked about how neurodivergence was potentially a strength in prehistory for those folks. And so often, even if you had a disability, especially an invisible one, as long as you were benefiting the tribe, you would be a member of that tribe. You wouldn't be left behind. In antiquity, ancient Greeks believed that beauty and intelligence were intertwined. So if you had a disability that was in any way disfiguring, that would automatically lead them to believe that you weren't intelligent. In many cultures, it was believed that disability was a mark of the god's wrath. So oftentimes children born with disabilities were abandoned and left to die of exposure. In the Middle Ages, disability was met with fear, belief that disability was the result of sin and evil or the work of the devil. So disabled folks were often outcast, homeless, or beggars. Institutions that were developed for them were more for the purpose of hiding disabled folks rather than caring for them, and conditions in those institutions were often inhumane. In the Renaissance, there was some effort to provide medical care through institutionalization. So monks, nuns, and other religious institutions would often provide care for disabled people. In 1247, the hospital known as the Priory of the New Order of Our Lady of Bethlehem was founded in London. And in the 1600s, King James I established it as the Royal Bethlehem Hospital. And it was actually the first ever psychiatric hospital in the world. But you may know it better as Bedlam. So those conditions in those institutions were not always humane, not always great. And fear persisted throughout the Renaissance. So the Spanish Inquisition and the Salem witch trials are really good examples of that. Many of the people who were burned as witches were likely disabled, whether they had psychiatric disabilities, intellectual disabilities, or mental health impairments, or physical deformities. Oftentimes they were burned as witches because they were different. In the 17 and 1800s, disabilities became more commonplace. Does anyone want to take a stab at why that might be?
I don't know my history very well, so I'm going to say polio.
Okay.
I don't know.
Not polio. I will give you a hint. Napoleon had a lot to do with this.
I was going to say historically wars and things like that was causing a lot of disability, especially in those time periods.
Yes, exactly. There were a lot of wars in those time periods. The guns, cannons, they became more sophisticated, so injuries were more severe. At the same time, healthcare improved, and so more people would survive those injuries, whereas in the past they may have just died. So you would see a lot more disabled individuals in society, disabled veterans. Trapper also noted industrialization led to workplace injuries. Yes, that's the other reason, the Industrial Revolution. So because those disabilities became more common and people would see them more often, that fear kind of went away, right? People weren't afraid of someone who maybe had a limb amputated in the Civil War. There wasn't that fear that was a result of sin or evil, right? They kind of had an understanding that that was a result of being a soldier or the result of working in a factory. So that helped reduce some of that fear. At the same time, disabled folks were often still destitute or homeless. And then there was a movement in the 17 and 1800s called oralism for deaf folks. So that was a movement away from sign language, a movement away from the deaf community being together and separating them and teaching them to verbalize rather than sign language. And then as we moved into the 20th century, discrimination persisted. So there's the 1907 Immigration Act, and in that act, immigrants found to be mentally or physically defective, affecting their ability to earn a living, were not allowed to enter the country. Often, even if they arrived with family members, they weren't allowed in. And there was a fear of making the United States a country of defectives. There were what were deemed as ugly laws. They were passed between 1867 and 1974. And they were ordinances in US cities that deemed it illegal, according to the San Francisco Ugly Law, for any person who is diseased, maimed, mutilated, or deformed in any way so as to be unsightly or disgusting to expose himself to public view. And the last one of these laws was actually not repealed until 1974 in Chicago. Throughout the 20th century, folks with disabilities often were parts of sideshows or freak shows with circuses, and that was oftentimes the only way to earn a living. When Hitler rose to power in the 1930s, the eugenics movement came into vogue, and people with disabilities were subject to experimentation and mass murder. And throughout the 20th century, institutionalization for folks with disabilities continued to persist. So, not to be all doom and gloom, I want to switch gears to look at some of the progress that we have made with disability rights. And I'm kind of proud to say that one of the first things that our country did in its infancy is to establish sort of one of the first disability rights laws. So in 1776, the Continental Congress established the first Pension Act for soldiers who were disabled in the service of the United States. It was called the Pension Act for Invalid Veterans, and it established half pay for veterans who were unable to perform manual labor as a result of being injured. In 1817, the American School for the Deaf was founded in Hartford, Connecticut, and it was the first school for children with disabilities in the Western Hemisphere. In 1864, under President Lincoln, the Columbia Institution for the Deaf, Dumb, and Blind was established. And I do want to point out that in this case, the term dumb means mute or nonverbal and not intellectually disabled or stupid or anything like that. And obviously we don't use that term anymore. And that institution was the first college in the world to accept students with disabilities. It still exists today, but it is now known as Gallaudet University. In 1918, the Smith-Sears Veterans Rehab Act was passed, and it provided employment assistance for disabled veterans returning from World War I. In 1920, the Smith-Fess Act was passed, and that established a civilian vocational rehabilitation. It was the first federal program to provide vocational assistance to Americans with physical disabilities. In 1936, the Randolph-Shepard Act passed, and it enhanced employment opportunities for people with visual disabilities, specifically allowing them to operate vending facilities on federal property. In 1938, the Fair Labor Standards Act was passed. It established a fair and equal wage for disabled people. And the Wagner-O'Day Act was passed, and it required federal agencies to purchase specified products made by people who had visual disabilities, and that was later expanded to include people who had significant disabilities. In 1943, the Barden-La Follette Act was passed, and that expanded vocational rehabilitation services to people with mental and visual disabilities. In 1945, the National Employ the Physically Handicapped Week was started. Congress established the first week in October to pay tribute to the accomplishments of people with disabilities in the workforce. In 1988, that was expanded to the whole month, and now we just know it as Disability Awareness Month. In 1946, the National Mental Health Act was passed, and it established the National Institute of Mental Health. In 1945, the vocational, I went the wrong way. In 1954, the Vocational Rehabilitation Amendment of 1954 was passed, and that targeted people who could work with assistance. So if they had an intellectual disability, and that helped thousands of people gain employment. And it funded more than 100 university-based rehabilitation programs, and ultimately led to the creation of the National Institute on Disability and Rehabilitation Research. In 1964, the Urban Mass Transit Act was passed, and it established that all mass transit vehicles need to be equipped with a wheelchair lift. And you'll notice that the next year I go to is 1965, but what did I miss? What giant civil rights legislation did I not include on this timeline? Does anyone know? Man, the history department did not show up today. What I don't have on here is the Civil Rights Act of 1964, right? The big civil rights legislation. And the reason I don't have that on here is the Civil Rights Act of 1964 did not include disability. In 1965, Medicare and Medicaid was passed, and that allowed for federally subsidized healthcare programs to disabled and elderly Americans. Also, the Voting Rights Act was passed, and that provided assistance for disabled folks to vote. The Vocational Rehabilitation Amendments, or Rehabilitation Act amendments passed, and that provided for assistance for disabled folks. Extended vocational rehab benefits, including funding for people with behavioral disorders. And then the Higher Education Act of 1965 was passed, and that provided financial assistance for people with physical disabilities entering college or university. And so you'll notice I jumped to 1973, and what is missing between 1965 and 1973 is that the Fair Housing Act, which was passed in 1968, is not on here either. And that is because that also did not include disabilities, and that did not get updated until 1988. In 1973, the Rehabilitation Act was passed. That is more commonly referred to as Section 504. And it is the first federal civil rights protection for people with disabilities. It stated that people with disabilities cannot be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or subjected to discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. In 1975, the Developmental Disability Assistance and Bill of Rights Act was passed, and it stated that people with developmental disabilities have a right to appropriate treatment, services, and rehabilitation in the least restrictive setting that maximizes potential. And funds would not be provided to any program that didn't meet standards for nutritious diet, provide medical services and dental services. It prohibited physical restraints. It allowed for visiting rights for relatives and forced compliance with fire and safety standards. In 1975, the Education for All Handicapped Children Act was passed, and it required that all public schools accepting federal funds provide access to education for children with physical and mental disabilities. Public schools were required to create educational plans with parent and guardian input that closely mirrored the educational experience of non-disabled students. It is now referred to as the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA. In 1978, the Rehabilitation Act amendments of 1978 were passed, and it established the first federal funding for independent living centers and created a National Council of the Handicapped under the Department of Education. In 1980, the Civil Rights of Institutionalized Persons Act was passed, and it allowed people with disabilities to file civil suits with the Justice Department if their rights were violated. In 1982, the Telecommunications for the Disabled Act passed, and that is a law making it mandatory for public phones to be accessible to the deaf and hard of hearing. Not really an issue anymore. I don't even know if public phones exist. In 1985, the Mental Illness Bill of Rights Act passed. That requires states to provide protection and advocacy for people with psychological disabilities. In 1988, the Fair Housing Act was amended, and that now protects folks with disabilities from housing discrimination. In 1990, the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA, was passed. It's the most comprehensive disability legislation in history. It guarantees Americans with disabilities unrestricted access to public buildings, equal opportunity in employment, equal access to government services and employment opportunities. Also in 1990, the Television Decoder Circuitry Act was passed, and it mandated that all televisions 13 inches or larger contain a caption decoding chip, so that all TVs over 13 inches would have the ability to have closed captioning without additional equipment. In 1996, the Telecommunications Act passed, and that requires telecommunications manufacturers and service providers to ensure all their equipment is designed and developed to be made accessible for all. The Air Carrier Access Act was passed, and that enforces that people with disabilities receive consistent and non-discriminatory treatment when traveling by air. And the Mental Health Parity Act was passed, and that prevents group health plans and health insurance companies from imposing annual or lifetime limits on mental health care benefits, so that they're less favorable than medical or surgical benefits. In 2004, IDEA was permanently authorized, and the name was changed. And it permanently authorized a grant program that provides federal funding to states to offer a free, appropriate public education to all children with disabilities in the least restrictive environment. In 2008, the ADA was amended, and it broadened the interpretation of the term disability. Additionally, the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act was passed, and that prohibits health insurance companies from denying coverage or charging higher premiums based on genetic predisposition. It also prevents employers from using a person's genetic information when making decisions about hiring, firing, job placement, and promotions. In 2009, the Christopher and Dana Reeve Paralysis Act passed. It was the first comprehensive legislation aimed at improving the lives of people with paralysis. The American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009 increased funding for individuals through the Disabilities Education Act. The funds provided $500 million in vocational rehab services, including job training and education and placement. In 2010, the 21st Century Communications and Video Accessibility Act brought the ADA into the 21st century to include new digital, broadband, and mobile innovations. The law governs everything that is broadcasted or used for communication to be accessible for everyone. In 2014, Section 503 of the Rehab Act was updated, and it prohibits federal contractors and subcontractors from discriminating in employment against people with disabilities, and to take affirmative action to recruit, hire, and promote and retain disabled folks. The Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act provides a comprehensive change to a number of employment and educational related programs, including services for people with physical, intellectual, and developmental disabilities. And then the Achieving Better Life Experience Act, or ABLE, improved financial stability and employment options for people with disabilities by authorizing tax advantage savings accounts for youth and adults with disabilities. So that's a lot of gain, right? From burning people with disabilities because they're witches, all the way to where we are today. But those laws didn't happen in a vacuum. They didn't happen because Congress was like, you know what, we need to do this. What was the catalyst for all of this legislation? Why did it happen?
I'm just going to throw out there, activists working on behalf of folks with disabilities or folks who have disabilities fighting for their rights to access the things that they should have already been granted.
Yes, you are 100% right, Erin. None of this would have happened without folks advocating for it and protesting and pushing for it. So there are lots of examples of disability activism, and I'm just highlighting some of the biggest ones. So the first one I want to highlight is the 504 sit-ins. And if you've seen the movie Crip Camp, you would have known all about this. But if you haven't, I do recommend watching that. It's on Netflix and on YouTube. But the 504 sit-ins were a disability rights protest staged in 10 cities with demonstrations and occupations of the offices of the Federal Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. And the goal was to force the Carter administration to issue regulations implementing Section 504 of the Rehab Act of 1973. So the act was passed, but there weren't regulations in place to actually give it teeth to make those requirements that were passed to actually happen. And the demonstration in San Francisco in particular lasted nearly a month. So protesters with disabilities occupied the federal building in San Francisco for nearly a month. And you can see some of the images that from here on the screen. There's some folks sleeping on the stairs with their wheelchair nearby. There's a image of Judy Heumann protesting in front of the White House to pass Section 504 regulations, and below is just two other people demonstrating to pass the Section 504 regulations. And after almost a month, on April 28th, the Health, Education, and Welfare Secretary Joseph Califano signed those regulations. Another example of activism is the Gang of 19 and ADAPT. On July 5th, 1978, 19 people gathered at one of the busiest intersections in Denver, Colfax Avenue and Broadway. They got out of their wheelchairs and they lay down to stop traffic. And the goal of this protest was to demonstrate the inaccessibility of the city's public transportation system. And it was a year-long protest, and ultimately it forced the Denver Transit Authority to invest in wheelchair lift buses. Deaf President Now happened at Gallaudet University in 1988. Gallaudet University had appointed a president who was not deaf, despite two of the three candidates, finalist candidates, being deaf themselves. Gallaudet at that point had never had a deaf president, and this set off a student protest known as Deaf President Now. And if you will remember back from a couple slides ago, Gallaudet University is the leading deaf university in the country. It was that university that I mentioned that was authorized by Abraham Lincoln. And the protest was known as Deaf President Now. Protests shut down campus. They marched to the US Capitol. They gained national attention and support. President Bush supported them. Celebrities supported them. And their demands were that Elizabeth Zinser must resign and a deaf person must be selected president. Jane Spillman had to step down as the chairperson of the board of trustees, and deaf people needed to constitute a 51% majority on the board, and that there would be no reprisals against students or employees involved in the protest. And ultimately Zinser resigned, and Dr. I. King Jordan, who was deaf, was the first deaf president of Gallaudet University. You may have seen these images, especially with this past year being the 30th anniversary of the ADA. So these images show folks crawling up the Capitol steps. Before the ADA was signed into law in 1990, it had sort of stalled in Congress. And so on March 12th, hundreds of demonstrators on the National Mall left their wheelchairs and crutches behind and began crawling up the steps to the west entrance of the Capitol to protest the delay and to draw attention to the inaccessibilities that the ADA's reasonable accommodations clause was supposed to fix. And so ultimately the ADA was passed. So I am going to launch my poll again, and I am going to ask you again. Do disabled people have equal rights today? And give you about 20 more seconds to finish entering your answers there. Okay, I will end that and I will share the results. So they changed a little bit. Before it was 81 and 19%. Before 81% said no and 19% said yes. And now that has changed a little bit where 79% said no and 21% said yes. And I hate when professors do this, but I'm not a professor, so it's okay. But this was a trick question. I don't think we're there yet. Certainly, we have made gains and people with disabilities have more rights now than ever before, but I don't think we're there at equality yet. So I want to take a moment to address intersectionality and disability, because as we have talked about in the past, people have more than one identity. And BIPOC folks are often more adversely affected by disability, as are folks of low socioeconomic status. And the intersection of other marginalized identities often compounds the negative impacts of being disabled. So race and disability are not completely separate sources of disadvantage that parallel each other. Rather, they are overlapping identities, and both are related to systemic inequality. Most disability narratives that you will read are from a white cisgender perspective, and we really need to work on expanding that lens. So just some issues that face folks of other marginalized identities who are also disabled. For the Black community, Black folks are more likely to be in poverty and face employment discrimination. And when you add disability into that mix, it's what's called triple jeopardy. So that's really compounded that poverty and employment discrimination if Black folks also have a disability. According to the World Institute on Disabilities, Latinx families are more likely to believe that it's the family's role to take care of the disabled member, and so they're less likely to seek out help. Attitudes of shame is also a byproduct of Latinx cultural norms and other religious beliefs. And language and education barriers adversely affect disabled Latinx folks. So most schools have an ESL program and a special education program, and often those two don't overlap. So the ESL instructor may know Spanish, but they're not a special education teacher, and the special education teacher may not know Spanish. So oftentimes those needs, there's a gap between those two needs. For the Asian and Pacific Islander community, cultural values encourage hard work and excellence. So disabled people may not be perceived as exhibiting those values, and that would bring shame to the family, which results in stigma. Folks with invisible disabilities may not be seen as disabled in Asian and Pacific Islander homes, but rather families are more likely to attribute negative behaviors as an inability in the person and therefore not seek proper treatment. Indigenous folks have what's known as sovereign immunity, so they're not subject to federal laws like the ADA, which means that disability access is not guaranteed unless they waive that sovereign immunity. And of course, that would bring in a whole other host of issues. Common issues faced by the Indigenous community include lack of disability awareness and lack of infrastructure to support the disability community's needs. So just a chart here that shows the prevalence of disability by race. You can see that non-white Hispanics, about 11% of non-white Hispanic or non-Hispanic whites, excuse me, are disabled. 14% of Black or African American folks, 8% of Hispanic or Latinx folks, 5% of Asian folks, and so a total of about 11% of people in the US are disabled. The likelihood of having a disability increases with age. So 6% of young adults ages 18 to 20 have a disability, compared with 22% of adults near retirement age, 61 to 65. And the disparity by race widens with age too. So at age 18 to 20, Black Americans are slightly more likely to have a disability than non-Hispanic whites, 7% compared to 6%. But among those ages 61 to 65, that disparity grows to 30% compared to 20%. Younger Latinx folks have a lower rate of disability than non-Hispanic whites. At age 55, those are equivalent, about 15%. And then older Latinx folks, 61 to 65, are more likely to have a disability than non-Hispanic whites, 23% compared to 20%. I see that Soraya and Aaron are putting some information about Crip Camp and Judy Human in the chat. So if you're interested in checking any of that out, please refer to the chat. Folks with disabilities are disproportionately affected in education. Children with disabilities, especially those who are also people of color, often have unequal access to educational resources despite laws guaranteeing that access. So you can see that in the charts up here, in the first chart, it's showing the percent of folks with less than a high school diploma. So that top line, the solid blue line, is folks with disabilities, and the dashed orange line below is people without disabilities. So you can see that people with disabilities, about 17% have less than a high school diploma, compared with about 7% of people without disabilities. And then if you look at the chart below that, the percent with a bachelor's degree or more, that gap is quite large. The top line shows folks without disabilities, and you can see that about 40% of people without disabilities have a bachelor's degree or higher. And if you look at the lower line for folks with disabilities, that's only about 16% of folks with disabilities have a bachelor's degree or higher. And there's a question that popped in the chat. Do you feel the difference in statistics by race vary because of what you indicated before, i.e. lack of awareness, lack of diagnosis, access issues, disbelief in disabilities? Yes, like if you had noticed that the amount of Asian folks with disabilities is much less, I do believe that a lot of Asian folks with invisible disabilities do not get diagnosed or seek treatment or self-identify as disabled because of some cultural norms. Let's see, I lost where I was. So I have another chart here that shows that breakdown of bachelor's degree or higher by race and ethnicity. So you can see the top line on each one indicates folks with a disability, and the lower line, the red line, indicates folks with no disability. So for non-Hispanic whites, 17% of folks with disabilities have a bachelor's degree or higher, compared to 41% of non-disabled white folks. For Black individuals with disabilities, 11% have a bachelor's degree or higher, compared with 24% of non-disabled Black folks. For the Latinx community, about 10% of Latinx folks with disabilities have a bachelor's degree or higher, compared to 17% for non-disabled Latinx. For the Indigenous community, about 9% of disabled folks in the Indigenous community have a bachelor's degree or higher, compared with 16% of non-disabled. And then the total is down there below with 15% of disabled folks having a bachelor's degree or higher, and 35. And this statistic's a little bit older than the charts that I first showed, so it's slightly different. And I do have one that particular graph did not include the Asian community, so the second graph is a couple years older than the first, but it does include the Asian community and leaves the Indigenous community out. So you can see that the Asian community by far has the highest attainment of a bachelor's degree or higher, with disabled Asians 26% having a bachelor's degree or higher, and 52% overall of Asian folks having a bachelor's degree. So Asian and non-Hispanic whites are more likely to have a college degree than African Americans or Latinos with disabilities, but these two groups also have a higher disparity between the adults with and without disabilities. Because educational attainment is such an important factor in employment and income, the lower level of education among adults with disabilities, and especially among adults of color with disabilities, has a significant impact on the ability of these folks to be economically successful. So with that in mind, I want to take a look at financial stability. So the poverty rate for adults with disabilities is more than twice the rate of adults with no disabilities. As you can see in the chart in the upper right-hand corner, folks with disabilities are on the top line, and currently, or in 2019, that's about 26% of folks with disabilities overall live in poverty, compared with about, what is that? Maybe 12% of folks without disabilities. And then it also is broken down here by disability status and race. So the added cost of living with a disability averaged between $1,000 and $7,000 a year. And when I looked up that statistic, I felt that was pretty low. If you have a significant disability, that number is going to be a lot higher. So having a disability creates a challenge of extra cost of living in terms of healthcare needs, long-term supports, expenses of adaptive equipment, assistive technology, personal assistance services, home modifications, transportation. And over the lifespan, these additional costs adversely impact the financial stability of individuals and families and can limit economic opportunities. And so the poverty rates vary by color for people with and without disabilities. So you can see that almost 40% of African Americans with disabilities live in poverty, compared with 24% of non-Hispanic whites, 29% of Latinos, and 19% of Asians. And so while disability and poverty have an interactive effect, social services systems in this country treat them separately. So for example, disability benefits, including healthcare coverage, are often hinged on proving that one is incapable of working. But anti-poverty programs often have a work requirement. So people with disabilities attempting to avoid poverty have to face difficult choices. Is it preferable to leave the labor market and qualify for disability benefits, or work at whatever level possible and receive wages and perhaps qualify for food stamps or earned income tax credits? And so disability is both a cause and a consequence of poverty, and poverty and disability reinforce one another, contributing to increased vulnerability and exclusion. So poverty causes disability. Children living in poverty are more likely to have asthma, chronic illness, environmental trauma such as lead poisoning, learning disabilities, and low birth weight that lead to further disabilities. People in more physically demanding jobs are often more likely to suffer workplace injuries that lead to disabilities. People in poverty are also less likely to treat disabling conditions and to mitigate their impact. So limited access to high quality medical care and early intervention may mean that a condition goes untreated longer and has a potentially more severe lifelong effect. And disability causes poverty as well. So disability adversely affects employment possibilities and earnings. It can also impose additional costs on families, such as medical bills and transportation, and modification to their home and personal assistance. You can see that folks with disabilities are often negatively impacted in employment. So you can see the first chart shows median earnings in thousands. So for folks with disabilities, that median earnings is about $39,000 a year, whereas folks with disabilities, it's about $48,000 a year. And that is widening. And if you look at the employment ratio, that gap is huge. So about 80% of folks without disabilities are employed, compared to about 39% of people with disabilities are employed. And of course, that has an economic impact. And Jason wrote in the chat, more reasons for our country to have universal health care for everyone. I agree. And this just breaks down employment status by race. So you can see that 35% of non-Hispanic white folks with disabilities are unemployed, 25% of Black folks with disabilities, 35% of Latinx folks, 39% of Asian folks, and overall that's 33% of folks total. And then I want to change topics a little bit, that folks with disabilities are also more likely to be victims of assault and abuse. People with intellectual disabilities are victims of sexual assault at a rate of 7 times more than non-disabled people. And they're more likely to be assaulted by someone that they know. Less than 14% of rapes were perpetuated by strangers, so most likely the perpetrator is someone they know. And oftentimes the crimes go unrecognized, unprosecuted, and unpunished. According to Human Rights Watch, when compared to able-bodied women, women with disabilities are 3 times more likely to be physically abused or assaulted. According to the University of Michigan, it's estimated that as many as 40% of women with disabilities experience sexual assault or physical violence in their lifetimes, and more than 90% of folks with developmental disabilities will experience sexual assault. And then I just want to draw attention to the fact that race and disability are also related to police brutality. According to a study by the Rudderman Foundation, 30 to 50% of people killed by the police are disabled. Disability is often looked in news reports, for example, in the murders of Sandra Bland, Eric Gardner, and Freddie Gray. The term underlying conditions was used, and then it was also used as sort of blame for why they died rather than they were murdered, but that underlying conditions contributed to their death, which is not true. According to the CDC, Indigenous people have the highest rates of police brutality per capita. And oftentimes folks who are deaf and neurodivergent, they may be seen as non-compliant by police because they may not be able to understand the directions that are being given to them, and that can result in brutality. And there's more. So I don't want to be all doom and gloom, but a couple more. There's no law that prevents disabled folks from getting married. However, many disabled folks aren't able to marry their partners because the partner's income can count against them. And so if they get married to their partner, they can lose their state benefits or healthcare coverage. Voting, even though the ADA is 30 years old, 60 to 80% of polling places are still inaccessible. And currently there are numerous bills being proposed and passed across the country, limiting access to absentee and mail-in voting and requiring voter ID laws. And folks with disabilities are less likely to have an ID, and it is more difficult for them to get an ID, especially if they live in a low-income or rural area. Parental rights are an issue. So more than in 20 states, parents can lose their custody of their children related to disability. There's no paid parental leave in this country, and there's often not childcare for children with disabilities or funding for additional in-home care. Although adults with disabilities are less likely to lack health insurance because they're often covered by Medicare or Medicaid, they're twice as likely to have difficulty paying their medical bills. And then housing continues to be an issue. Oftentimes, housing that is accessible is more expensive, and folks who spend more than 30% of their income are considered cost burden. And so a lot of disabled folks, especially disabled folks of color, are spending a disproportionate amount of their income on housing. Okay. So we've looked at how far we've come and where we need to go, but how do we fix this? What do we do? Oftentimes these problems seem very overwhelming and we feel small and ineffective, but we really need to move past that feeling and identify what we can do to become an activist or an ally. And so at the end of each session in the past, I'd asked you to kind of set some intentions. And now what I want to do is together as a group, brainstorm how you can be an advocate or an ally for folks with disabilities. So if I'll have Emily or Caden launch that whiteboard, you can put in there how you might be an ally. I also want to leave time for folks to ask questions. So if you have questions, you can feel free to raise your hand, unmute yourself, put those questions in the chat. If you are unable to interact with the whiteboard, you can always put your responses to the question of how to be an advocate or ally in the chat, and we will verbalize them for you or add it to the whiteboard. If you don't remember how to interact with the whiteboard, if you click on the view options, there is an annotate button, and that will allow you to either write or type, or you can use the little stamps to point out your agreement with what other people write. Jason put in the chat, raisingofamerica.org has a great documentary series that advocates for the benefits of universal childcare. Okay, I see some things coming in on the whiteboard. Promote accessibility in different forms and universal design, absolutely. Vote for changes to policies that are discriminatory to folks with disabilities, 100%, right? You can, even if you are very bogged down with your life, you feel like I just don't have time to, you know, volunteer my time to join a cause, you can always use your vote to help other people. Continue to educate my sphere of influence. And as folks continue to add things to the whiteboard or the chat, I know we're running a little bit low on time, and I'm happy to stay a few minutes extra if you have lingering questions or you want to ask your questions in a smaller setting. But please feel free if you have any questions or comments to share those at this time. I see a couple more coming in. Provide resources to those trying to be more ADA compliant so that there isn't one more thing they are trying to do on top of an already overwhelming job. Advocate for accessibility in our community. I think one thing, if you were at our keynote, one thing that Cece said was that anyone can be an activist. If you look at your community and identify a need and work to meet that need or help your community, that is one way to be an activist. It doesn't have to be big to be impactful.
Natasha, excuse me. I have a question. I noticed on the timeline, it had stopped at 2014. Does that mean that things have slowed down since then, or?
Yeah, I would say that in the past several years, there haven't been any major disability rights legislation passed. The only thing in recent history is in 2020, the FDA prohibited or made the use of using, I want to say shock collars, that's the wrong word, but shock devices in institutions for disabled folks. So they made that illegal, but that's really been one of the few advances in the past several years. Consequences when ADA equipment regularly found not to be functional.
Do you mind if I jump in and say something on more of like an individual versus like disability community level?
Absolutely, go ahead, Erin.
Okay, so one of my friends is a wheelchair user, and going out to eat, I wanted to make sure that the space was accessible to him in whatever ways that meant for him. So he actually gave a few options of the restaurant that we were going to go to so that he was aware of it and knew the landscape and was comfortable with it. I'm also someone who has anxiety, so he gave me those options ahead of time. So I was able to look through and figure out what I was going to eat and all those different things. but just kind of being conscientious of like what that might mean for still doing stuff together and still having those wonderful experiences, but also just factoring in those things. So it's not one of those awkward, weird things where you have to like address the disability each time. And also it's just wonderful giving business to places that are accessible and are already factoring those into their designs versus having to find a different way in and different things like that.
Yeah, that's a great point, Erin. And I especially like your point that you can speak with your dollars, right? You can influence the community by where you choose to spend money, and in spending money at places that are accessible will encourage those places that aren't, if they want to get your business, to make those changes. And I just want to point out something that we often say in the disability student services community, that the ADA, that's the floor. It's not the ceiling. So just because you're there at the floor doesn't mean you can't go higher. It doesn't mean you can't go above and beyond. So I just really want to point that out, that, you know, if you're faculty and you get a student's accommodations, that's the floor. That doesn't mean that's the only thing you can do to help that student. It's not the ceiling. All right, I can see that we are right at time, and I do want to respect if folks need to leave. You're welcome to do that now. I really appreciate you attending the Disability Dialogues, especially if you managed to make it to all 4 sessions. I really appreciate your willingness to be here and learn, and I am always open to, if you have further questions, you can find me in the campus directory and reach out to me. If you have lingering questions or would just like to ask your questions in a quieter setting, I am happy to hang out for a few more minutes.
Thank you, everyone.
Jason, don't you have a Girl Scout selling you cookies anyway?